Two men argued about how to say a line from Shakespeare. 23 people died. That is not an exaggeration. It happened in New York City, and the whole thing started with a handkerchief. Stick around, because the men who talked the star into going back on stage that night, you have read their books. Let me take you back to New York, 1849. But first you need to understand one thing about this city. Shakespeare was not fancy here. Shakespeare was pop culture. Dock workers quoted Macbeth. Butchers knew Hamlet by heart. Traveling companies performed the plays in barns and saloons all over the country. A night at the theater was loud. The audience yelled. They cheered, they booed, they demanded encores, and they threw things. Booing an actor was not vandalism. It was your review. Now meet our two leading men. Edwin Forrest was American, and he was built like a bull. Huge chest, huge voice, huge emotions. He started out at a working-class theater downtown, and he never lost that crowd. When Forrest played a king, he played him like a dock worker who had just won a fight. William Macready was English, refined, controlled, and extremely serious about the art of acting. He also thought most Americans were loud and vulgar. He wrote that down, in his diary, repeatedly. For years, these two circled each other politely. Then Forrest went to London and got booed off a stage. Not just booed while playing Macbeth in front of the entire English press. Forrest was certain he knew who was behind it. He blamed Macready. There is no evidence Macready did anything, but Forrest never let it go. And here we get the pettiest revenge in theater history. Macready was performing Hamlet in Edinburgh. Forrest bought a seat in a private box, sat down quietly, and waited. When Macready reached a certain moment, Forrest let him have it. He booed, loudly, in a theater full of people. So, what exactly set him off? Macready had added a little dance to the scene, waving a handkerchief across the stage. Forrest thought that was absurd. He called it a handkerchief dance. Then Forrest did the thing that turned a bad night into a war. He wrote a letter to the London Times admitting he did it, and defending his right to do it. An actor publicly booing another actor, then bragging about it in the newspaper. The English press destroyed him. His career in Britain was finished, and he sailed home furious. That is the origin of this whole story. A handkerchief. Hold on to that, because it never stops being ridiculous. A few years later, Macready came to America for a farewell tour. New York had a brand new opera house at Astor Place. It was built for exactly one purpose. Rich people wanted somewhere to watch a show without sitting near anybody poor. The place had a dress code, kid gloves, and a white vest. A theater that told you at the door whether you belonged. Guess who was booked to perform there? And guess who booked himself into a theater a mile down the road? Same night, same play. Both of them were doing Macbeth, same city, same evening. On the first night, Forrest's supporters bought up the cheap seats and waited. When Macready walked out, the sky fell on him. Rotten eggs, potatoes, apples, lemons, shoes, bottles of something that smelled awful. Then they started ripping the chairs out of the floor and throwing those. Macready kept going. He finished the act in total silence, acting it out in mime. Nobody could hear a word he said. And a mile away, at the exact same hour, Forrest was doing the same play. Macbeth happens to have a line about purging the English out of the country. When Forrest said it, the whole audience rose to its feet and cheered. So, Macready quit. He announced he was taking the next boat back to England. Honestly, who could blame him? And here is where this story gets its best twist. A group of New York's most respectable gentlemen wrote him a letter. They begged him to stay and finish the run. They promised him, in writing, that the good sense and respect for order in this community would protect him. Two of the men who signed that letter were Washington Irving and Herman Melville. Yes, that Herman Melville. He had not written Moby Dick yet, and he was signing the note that started a massacre. Macready agreed to go back on. Meanwhile, a political operator named Isaiah Rinders spotted an opportunity. He was not really a theater guy. He wanted to humiliate the newly elected mayor, and a riot would do that nicely. So he papered the entire city with posters. The posters did not mention acting at all. They asked one question: shall Americans or English rule in this city? And there it is. That is the moment this stops being a story about two actors. Watch what the city does next. The mayor asked the theater to just close for one night. The owners refused. The chief of police was asked if his men could handle it. He had 900 officers. He said no. So, they called out the army. Read that back to yourself. The state militia was mobilized to protect a play. May 10th. Curtain at 7:30. Police inside the building, police outside, and hundreds of soldiers a few blocks away. Macready walked out, and the shouting started instantly. Somebody held up a sign on stage that read, "The Friends of Order will remain quiet." It did not work. The loudest troublemakers were arrested and locked in a room in the basement, so they gathered wood shavings and held them up to a gas lamp. They tried to burn the building down from inside their own cell. And outside, the crowd kept growing. 10,000 people filled the streets around that opera house, and one small detail decided everything. The city happened to be digging a sewer right next to the theater, which meant the street was covered in loose paving stones. An unlimited supply of ammunition, delivered by the city itself, by accident. The windows went first. Then they smashed the street lamps to kill the lights. The soldiers arrived and were surrounded before they could form up. They tried a bayonet charge, and the crowd grabbed the rifle barrels with their bare hands. Officers went down. The stones kept coming. So the order was given to fire. The first volley went over everyone's heads on purpose. A warning shot. And the crowd looked at that and decided the guns must be loaded with blanks. They shouted at the soldiers to do it again. The general gave a second order. 2 words, fire low. The second volley was not a warning. Nobody ever tells you this next part. It is the reason I wanted to make this video. The people who died were not the ringleaders. George Curtis was a printer. Timothy Burns was a printer too, and he was 16 years old. William Harmer was a butcher, also 16. Henry Otten sold groceries. He died in a police station with his mother standing beside him. Asa Collins was shot as he stepped down off a streetcar. And Bridget Fagan was walking home with her husband, 2 blocks away from the theater. She was hit in the leg, she fell into his arms, and she died a few days later. She never saw the play. She never saw the riot. She was walking home. Macready, by the way, finished the performance. Then he put on an army officer's uniform as a disguise. He climbed onto a horse and rode out of the city. He sailed for England and never set foot in America again. The coroner's jury ruled that the soldiers had been justified. Then it added one sentence that hangs over the whole night. If more police had been sent, the army would never have been needed. The ringleaders went on trial, and every single one of them was convicted. The man they called the chief instigator was a writer named Ned Buntline. He got a year in prison, and he came out a folk hero. And later in life, that same man found a scout named William Cody and turned him into Buffalo Bill. The opera house never recovered. New Yorkers started calling it the Massacre Opera House at Astor Place. Within 4 years, it was gutted and sold off to a library. And Shakespeare? Shakespeare slowly stopped being something you were allowed to shout at. The rowdy crowd got pushed out of the theater, and the plays moved somewhere quieter and more expensive. That is the strangest part of all of this. The idea that Shakespeare is high culture, something serious and refined for serious, refined people, that idea is younger than you think. And part of how it got that way is one night in New York. Soldiers fired into a crowd that showed up to argue about acting. 23 people are buried under a fight about a handkerchief. If you want more stories where something ridiculous turns deadly, tell me in the comments. I have got a list.